Hello everybody. Followed by last week's research design, this week we're discussing research access, ethics and sampling. In this presentation, we're going to focus on research access. Research access is actually part of the very important factor you must consider in your research design process before you go into collect the data and analyze the data as indicated in the very inner corner of the research onion. So in the last few weeks, we have looked into the research onion layer by layer. So we looked into philosophical underpinning and approached their theory development. So which is the beliefs and assumptions and that you as a researcher have in terms of what reality is, whether there's one reality for you to find or there could be multiple realities for you to interpret. So that relates to your, as a researcher, your understanding on how knowledge is created. Yeah. So whether reality whether the knowledge is created or whether knowledge can be negotiated or knowledge is just there to be found. Yeah. So that linked to where we mentioned about the ontology, the epistemology, and the research paradigm of your research. And then that leads to the approach theory development, whether you do deductive, inductive, or abductive, we talked about before. And then next, in the last week, we talked about the research design. So your philosophical underpinning and your beliefs, assumptions in terms of what reality is and how knowledge is created really guided you the way how you would design your research. Yeah. So the methodological choices, whether your research would be qualitative and quantitative or could be mixed method. Yeah. So we talked about the alignment and coherence of your philosophical underpinning, the philosophies, and your research design. So for example, if your ontology is very positivist ontology and you believe there's only one reality to be found, and then that is likely to lead to your quantitative research design, methodological choice, yeah, quantitative research, and that might lead to later inner circle, the way how you're going to collect your data. So it's important, the coherence and alignment as well. And also we talked about last week the strategies your research is going to adopt. Again, that should be aligned with the methodological choice, whether your research quantitative and qualitative. Yeah, and as well as the time horizon, whether you're looking into a snapshot or a series of them. So next is where having got the theoretical underpinning of your research, philosophical underpinning of research, and you have designed and planned out your research, and then now you need to go out to collect the data. But before you go out to collect the data, as we said, you have to consider the research access, whether you have, whether you have the access or accessibility to your research. So if we see these research onions, which relates to the two important parts of your research project or your research proposal. So the very outer layers, so the 5 outer layers, including the philosophical underpinning and the research design, these are regarded as research methodology. And the very inner circle, data collection, data analysis circle, is called research methods. Okay, so I hope you can see the connection between the philosophy and design and the methods. So now we are going to move on to the access considerations. And actually, as you can see from the roadmap for your research project, as we have used before, so after research design, point 6, so what design frame you will use, as we mentioned, the research design in the research onion, the 3 circles after the 2 philosophical underpinning. So next 7 is think about the access and ethics. Yeah, so therefore it is a very important part and probably followed after the design or as part of the design as well. And in the meantime, this diagram and image also shows the importance of considering the access to the data and access of your research after the research design. Okay, and I see sometimes as part of your research design, the plan you do research, because in the planning process, you have to think about whether you can have access to the data or to the organization you would have or not. Okay, so these 2 diagrams just show you the importance of considering access as we talk about today. So what is research access? Let's just always start with the concept, understanding of the concept, yeah? So access really refers to the accessibility to the data, no matter whether your research is primary or secondary, or primary data or secondary data. So whether you would have access to this kind of data followed after or as part of your research design or the plan, yeah? So there are quite a few different types of access, and as Saunders, the core textbook, has kind of specified. So the first access is known as traditional access. So think about before technology, before the use of a computer, how would you access to various of data or the collection of the data? Yeah. So for example, you may conduct face-to-face interactions, maybe speaking to people in the form of interviews. Yeah, so face-to-face. But this is not allowed nowadays because of the COVID-19 and the government restrictions. There's no face-to-face interactions. Yeah. Or the traditional access could be correspondence postal questionnaires. You post questionnaires to different households and then collect them after a period of time, yeah? Or it could be telephone conversations. Instead of meeting face-to-face, you rent somebody that you know of or have agreed to take part in your research, yeah? So the first three traditional access are referring to the primary data that you're collecting through your own method for the primary first-hand data. But traditional access also includes the access to secondary data, the data that has already existed and collected by other people. That's known as visiting data archive, yeah, or sorts of databases, for example, under the university's online library. So where it means you do not have to design your questionnaires or your questions to speak to people or to be posted or to be discussed over the phone. And you can just visit the data that is already available. Okay, so with traditional access, there's two layers of access again. So one's called physical access, is where we refer to broker or gatekeeper's permission. So for example, if you want to speak to particular individuals, so a lot of the time you may just need to get the cognitive access, which means the consent from the individuals, yeah? But a lot of the time, the individuals are belonging to an organization, especially if you do topics in, for example, organizational related issues, your HR related topics, yeah? So instead of speaking to the people, get the consent, would you be happy to join my research? You may still need to get the physical access, to get the permission from the company as well. So you may have to go into the company in order to speak to the manager or the employees in the organization. Or even if you don't go there physically, you may still have to get the organization's permission for you to conduct research about that company. Okay, so you can't just say, I speak to your employee talking about their attitude towards, your leadership styles or your pay and equality kind of issues. So topic on your organization, just getting permission from the individual, which is not the case. You still have to get the permission from the organization as well. Okay, so in relation to the traditional access, you would still have internet mediated access. Is after the invention of computer technologies, for virtual access. Yeah. So for example, after the computer, we have got emails. So you may send your questionnaires via email. You may have instant messaging using WhatsApp, using different social media tools, Facebooks, Twitters kind of thing. And you may also use Skype, Teams, and Zoom for the virtual access. And then you may conduct online surveys or virtual interviews, or you may use kind of focus group discussions via Zoom breakout rooms and all sorts. Okay. So the third way is called intranet mediated access. Intranet means the internal, yeah. So which is very likely to refer to the virtual access via organizations' internal technological tools or channels. For example, at the university, we're all using StudyNet, isn't it? So if you say I'm conducting a research, posting information on StudyNet, so without accessing students through different channels, so that would be regarded as intranet mediated access. Yeah. And obviously there's a final type of access. It's called hybrid access. It could be a combination of all this traditional or internet or intranet mediated access. So as a researcher, you should not limit yourself to one particular type of access. Okay. And then linked to the concept, just moving further a little bit, in relation to primary research in particular, we have talked about this earlier, which regarded to the physical access and cognitive access, yeah? So which refers to the organizational access and individual access. So it's not, as we said, it's not only that you get the permission or consent from the particular individual who are investigating organizational related queries. You still have to have that organizational access, yeah? But organizational access still refers to single organization access or multiple organization access. So whether your research is related to one particular organization or a couple or a few organizations, probably in the same industry, for example. Yeah, so it is particularly related to kind of a survey or case study strategies. Yeah, it's one case or multiple cases. Individual access, whether it's kind of simple individual person, just normal person, employee, and organization, or could be elite person, you know, somebody who's very famous, who might not necessarily belong to a particular organization. Yeah, so all your research might not be related to organization-related issues, but just simple, you know, consumer behavior-related issues. So what do you do? How much you spend on what kind of, you know, every month over the lockdown period, for example, and not related into any particular organizational-related issues, so which is known as individual access, in which case you only need the permission or consent from the individual, not necessarily the organization. Yeah, so it's very important that you need to consider whether you would have the access to them, either through traditional ways or internet ways, in order to collect the data. Okay, and obviously the challenges associated with particularly traditional access, as we mentioned, is a physical and cognitive. Yeah, and also it's about whether you're external researcher or internal researcher, or could be participate research. And especially for those of you who might go on to placement in your second year, you may say, oh, I found something very interesting in the organization which I would like to investigate a little bit further. So in that case, if you want to do a research within the organization you're working with, it's very likely you're an internal researcher, isn't it? But you still have to have this kind of physical access and cognitive access. You still have to ask your manager or the general manager for the organization for permission to to conduct research on this company. Yeah, and you still need to have a cognitive access from the individuals, the consent from the individuals. Okay, and that might be relatively easier if you're an internal researcher, which is also known as participative researcher. And if you're an external researcher, it can be a little bit more challenging because you don't have any access to start with. Yeah, you may not have connections. So unless you have some kind of connections, which is a different case, and you may through that connection get access. But just say there are all sorts of challenges for research, especially in terms of the access. In response to the challenges, obviously Saunders and others have kind of recommended some strategies to gain access in their core textbook. Yeah, for example, they suggest you to ensure you're familiar with the organization or the group of people that before you make contact that you're going to investigate, and also allow yourself enough time to get contact, because you don't necessarily get an instant response from the organization saying, oh yes, please go ahead, welcome to do research on our organization, or get in touch with our employees, for example. Yeah, and also use existing contacts and developing new ones, as we mentioned. If you have already known somebody in the organization, well, that could be a shortcut, because you don't have to send generic emails, which is kind of being passed on to 1, 2, 3, 4, finally reach the right person a month later. Yeah, so use the existing contact whenever possible. And then next is to provide a clear account of the purpose of your research and the type of access you would require. And obviously, when you contact them for access, you need to know what exactly you're doing, and you state clearly in your email, or letter, just say what your research is about, what kind of access you would require. Do you just need to speak, the particular individual, for example, a manager, or do you need to reach out to many of their employees? Yeah, so you need to give them a clear rationale of your research and the kind of access you require. And the next is overcoming organizational concerns about granting access. And then there are challenges, but obviously the way how you want to overcome, where you start is important, isn't it? And next is identifying possible benefits to the organization for granting access. And in the meantime, it's always important in your letter or your email to indicate what the benefits they can get by granting you the access, or by allowing you to conduct the research, on their organization. So it's vital. They feel, I get something in return, for example, And also very important part is using suitable language. Write clearly, concisely, and politely, because you ask your favor from them, and they're doing great favor for your, 1/3 of your degree, aren't they? And next is facilitating replies when requested access. So you have to think about, what if they ask you for additional queries? What if, they come back asking for additional information? So how would you respond to them? Okay, and also developing access incrementally, because as we said, you may not necessarily get an answer or get a yes straight away. So how to kind of develop the incremental process, one email followed by another, and with more clarification, with more in-depth conversation. Okay. And also establishing your credibility is vital, isn't it? So let the organization believe you're a genuine researcher, which is kind of, not do any harm to the organization, and potentially, there might be benefits brought to their company after your research. Okay, and trust you make people feel you're a trustworthy and credible person, really. Okay. So therefore, the strategies are for you to consider. And obviously, in the whole process, you have to think about the time, the resources you would require, and then the accessibility of the research, and would you need to remain, the organization as confidential and private and not disclosing them, and then, anonymize all the participants who join your research. And all these things has to be kind of highlighted in your communication to request for access to the organization. Okay, and these are vital. It seems our discussion on access kind of quite kind of primarily focused on primary research, but actually research access can also relate to secondary research as well, so which is known as desk research, where as a researcher you do not have any interaction with humans, okay, but only dealing with data that's already been collected, that is available in a public domain, as we said, could be any sort of data available under online library of the university's resources, or under Google Scholar, or any other sources you may come across with. Okay, so it's important that in the process of collecting the data, and that you are objective, and you justify your choice why you choose this kind of data. And more detailed information is on the Saunders Handbook, Saunders Core Textbook, Chapter 8, utilizing secondary data for you to explore at your own leisure. In the core textbook, you will say Saunders and other scholars have categorized the secondary data into 3 different categories. One is the survey kind of data, including the censuses or ad hoc surveys like government or European or organizations, databases or information, or the documents related, the text, meeting minutes, communication emails, newsletters, kind of things, and all in audio and video forms as well. If you do research on advertising, for example, you may just look into the advertisement materials, or if you do research on packaging, you may look into the packages, what is on the label, for example, so audio, visual, kind of materials. And there are multiple sources as well, snapshot, longitudinal or continuously updated information that from industry reports, government report, or organizations, newsletters, as we mentioned, So have a read through it. Actually, it doesn't really matter what kind of sources they are, and as long as the data are relevant and credible to your research, okay? In relation to the secondary research or access to the secondary data, there's one kind of data has open access, which refers to the unrestricted online access to research output. A lot of the time, universities, for example, online library resources has to purchase license, like the textbooks or some kind of journal articles, university has to pay, which is not known as open access. Open access is unrestricted online and mostly free, which is the government, try to, or government or research funders nationally, internationally, try to encourage to move to this open access for resources, but not quite yet. But I hope the university's online library is good enough for you to use for your research, and obviously the Google Scholar materials as well. There are a lot of advantages of utilizing secondary data or for secondary research because they're already existing there, and you don't have to negotiate access and then the challenges associated to access related issues. And then they're intrusive, and then they are feasible for longitudinal studies, and where you can collect data in a chronological order from old to new. And then it's also available for you to conduct comparative and contextual related research, where you compare, you compare, information related to different organizations, for example, that is already existed there, and then, that is something advantage as well. And also you may come across with unforeseen, discoveries or new insight from the existing data. You make sense of them, you compare, contrast, and find something new. Yeah. And obviously, it's important that you're identifying in relation to the advantages, and it's important that you're identifying the relevant secondary data and as like a detective. Yeah, it's not every single secondary data or piece of information is relevant to your research, and you have to be like detective and then evaluate them. Oh, is this data relevant? Is this updated enough? And is this in the context of my research? Yeah, so it's important to establish the likely availability of the secondary data of your research and locating them, and the precise data that is required. You are not getting everything that you think is relevant, but it's important, you justify the relevance towards your research. Okay. Like anything else, something has advantages, must have disadvantages. So yeah, this is what we highlight a lot of the time, to be critical or have critical thinking head on. So for secondary research, secondary data, and it also has disadvantages, yeah, because it has been collected or conducted, by other people and probably for other purposes, may not necessarily match the purpose of your research, yeah, and there might be unsuitable aggregation or definitions because the concept used in that project might not necessarily the concepts you would like to use for your research. Okay, and also initial purpose might affect your research or the way how the data is presented. And for example, in some critiques, for example, and then probably the original purpose was to critique, really highlighting the negative aspects, so that might impact the way how it appears in your research, because your research need to be need to look into different counts, isn't it? So your purpose is not only focusing on the negative, for example, but to have an overall comprehensive perspective. And it can be very expensive to access. As we said, not all the data are open access, yeah, or have open access. So the university sometimes have a lot of data available, through different sources, but they may not be comprehensive. You may find particular sources that you need to spend a lot of money in order to get access, okay? And also you don't have control over the quality of the secondary data collected. Although we said anything published in credible journals or sources or channels are regarded as credible, reliable, but again, you may not be able to control it. Okay, therefore, in order to overcome these advantages, and you have to evaluate the sources of the secondary data. Okay, and then obviously in Saunders' book, they have got these 3 particular processes you can go through in terms of assessing the credibility and reliability or suitability for your research. Lastly, it's important to highlight that under COVID-19, access issue becomes vital. So it is not a problem for you to conduct secondary research or desk research with internet-mediated access. Obviously, as long as you have a computer, you can find the relevant information, and that's not a problem. However, for the traditional access or traditional primary research, you cannot conduct face-to-face research, okay? Because you can't meet people for interviews or for or focus group discussions and face-to-face. All right, but it's possible for you to do primary research via online through internet or intranet mediated access. But again, you need to consider what specific tool you would like to use. Is that traditional ways of telephone or postal, or more kind of more advanced or recent technological tools, Zoom, Teams, Skype, for example. And also you need to consider the sample selection, who do you want to conduct with, is that organizational level and individual level, so which leads to our next topic on sampling. To finish off, I'd like to still encourage you to engage with the learning, and obviously listen to my recorded lectures or look into the slides, and prepare for the case study for tutorial 1 and work on your own research project for the tutorial B. And for this week, to think about, as part of the research design, think about, the access, your research access, and how would you, access the data that would be required for your research. Yeah, whether your research is primary, secondary, the accessibility towards the data. Yeah, so I hope that helps. And again, as a researcher, you are the core. You have to take the initiative and to work on it. Okay, and best of luck.